All right, so let's start this broadcast with some breaking inputs that have just come in, where the United States has set the year 2027 as the deadline for Europe to take over NATO's defense capabilities. And according to a report by the news agency Reuters, the message was conveyed in a meeting in Washington this week. And during the meeting, the Pentagon officials reportedly conveyed that they were simply dissatisfied with the steps taken by Europe to boost its defenses in the wake of the Ukraine war. Further, the US officials have warned that if Europe fails to meet the 2027 deadline, then Washington may stop participating in some NATO defense coordination mechanisms. Since returning to the White House in January this year, Trump has repeatedly urged the NATO military alliance to spend more on its defenses. The message to Europe is quite clear. The United States no longer wants to be the primary security guarantor for the region, a role that it has played since the end of the Second World War. The developments have come on a day when Donald Trump unveiled the US's new national security strategy, a 30-page document detailing the US's global priorities. The document reserves some pretty harsh language for Europe, claiming that it faces a civilizational erasure. Further, it has also vowed that there would be no expansion of NATO. The Ukraine war has further cast its doubts on this transatlantic alliance. Just a day before, the German news weekly Der Spiegel had claimed that it had obtained some written notes of a conference call amongst European leaders this week, and during the call, the French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had reportedly expressed skepticism about the American role in peace negotiations. And during the call, Der Spiegel quotes Macron as having said that there is a chance that the United States could betray Ukraine on the question of territory without any clarity on security guarantees. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had expressed similar fears, and according to the report, the German Chancellor had warned that Zelensky should be careful in the coming days. Referring to the United States, he had told Zelensky that they are playing games with both you and us. Now, the comments are a vindication of the widening trust deficit between Washington and the European capitals, with the United States setting 2027 as the deadline for NATO to take on the primary role of defending Europe. It is now becoming increasingly clear that the United States under Donald Trump wants to fundamentally alter the security architecture underpinning US's ties with Europe. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got Ms. Jane Kininmont, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the United Nations Association UK and also a Senior Fellow at the ELN. Ms. Kininmont, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, what do you make of this measure by the United States, where it wants Europe to step up and to fend for its own security, whereby the year 2027, that's 2 years away, it wants the European nations to step up for their own security needs? How do you see this?
So there is a long-term geopolitical trend here where the US wants to be spending less money on defence overseas, and it wants to be focusing more of its resources in the Asia-Pacific, as it sees its number one rival today as China, and it is less worried about Russia. Russia's no longer a superpower in the eyes of the US in the way that China is. So sitting here in the Middle East, I'm in Qatar today, the Middle East has already gone through this with the US saying to them for years, we want to be less involved in the region, more focused on Asia, although that hasn't necessarily really come to pass. But I think the thing that's been worrying European leaders today is that this timeline is really being squeezed. 2027 is very soon, and really the military industrial production and the budgets just will not add up to Europe having that capacity in just 2 years' time.
Now, this measure where the United States under Donald Trump wants the Europeans to step up and fend for their own security, do you think this has got something to do with the personality of Donald Trump, or is this a complete change in how the United States looks at its own security and the security of its very close allies, for instance, in Europe, and also, as you mentioned, in the Middle East? Are we looking at a fundamental change in terms of how the United States of America will be looking at future geopolitical challenges?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, there is this long-term trend, but also there is a new style of politics brought in by Donald Trump. And, part of that is that he seems to many in Europe to be putting more pressure on his allies than he is on his adversaries. This is a day when the national security strategy is being read in Europe. It came out in the US last night. And really, it says very, very little about Russia and much more about this US administration's criticisms of Europe and essentially
Right.
something that seems to be a bit white nationalist, that they're basically saying Europe's losing its identity because of migration and we don't like it. So there is a kind of values difference coming
Right.
through between the Trump administration and most European leaders.
Just quickly, finally, before we let you go, Ms. Kiran, do you think this is a realization that has dawned on the leaders within Europe who for the last 7 decades, since the end of the Second World War, had been living under the security umbrella of the United States? Are the European capitals now prepared, mentally at least, that they need to fend for their own security needs and they may no longer have the backing of the United States in the manner that they did for the last 7 decades?
I think that realization has been dawning throughout the course of this year, but it's a matter of how quickly they can move and how much are they also willing to stand up to the US when the US is saying it will give Europe less, but it is also making a lot of demands of Europe. So there is a lot more to work out, but I do think there's a fundamental change in thinking in Europe and an expectation that there will need to be more defence autonomy. That's going to cost a lot of money and that will have opportunity costs too.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Ms. Kiran, for joining us from Doha in Qatar and getting us that perspective there. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.